All right, welcome to this new lesson where we're going to talk about two trends that you may have heard before here in the UI design space, and that is glassmorphism and neumorphism. And they've both been made popular within the last few years. Now, this also means this is not something that you want to integrate on every project. You want to use it very sparingly, if at all. All right, and so this first example is what we refer to as glassmorphism. And essentially, we can notice these little credit cards, and you can see how it has this glossy, not glossy, but kind of blurred out effect where we have an element in the background that's clearly crisp and defined, and then it becomes kind of blurred. It's kind of like a shower door, if you've seen some of those. And it just kind of creates a cool aesthetic, essentially, for your different elements, like card elements, for instance. So I'm going to show you how to achieve this here within Figma. And we're going to start just a new, we'll do a phone. So we'll do iPhone 13 Pro Max. Maybe we'll just put this over here. And what we want first is some sort of either illustration, it could be a photograph. In our case, we'll just go ahead and use a photograph. So what we'll do is we'll take the rectangle tool, and I'm going to right click, we'll go to plugins and then unsplash. And then once we're there, we're going to type in abstract, or just click right here. And we just want something that looks pretty interesting. I kind of like this one right here. We can see there's like a sharp edge, and if we want to position it differently, we can come over here and change fill to crop, and we can simply make this a little bit larger by holding shift and then maybe pushing it right up over here. So this is what it looks like now. And so then what we can do is we could take a rectangle again here, and we're just going to create kind of like a card element right around there. And we're going to demonstrate this with another photo as well, just so you can see how the same card aesthetic works across different photographs or textures in the background. And what we'll do here is we're going to take the color here and we'll make it white. And you could do this by making it dark as well, just experiment with it. And then also taking the opacity down maybe to around 10% or so. So that's the first step. We'll also go ahead and give it some border radius. So around 9 or so. Now we could just barely see it. And what we want to do now is under effects, we're going to click the plus icon and change this to background blur. At this point, we can click on the settings icon and maybe bump this up to 10 or so. Now, if you take this little slider, you can really experiment with the degree to which the background is blurred out. So maybe right around 10 to 15 is what I like. So now at this point, we can go ahead and I'm just going to copy and paste just some type just so we could kind of give it some context to see what this would look like in a real life situation. And maybe adjust this. And there we go. That is the basic effect. Now you can see over here, this one has borders and strokes around it. If you wanted to kind of give it a little bit of like a glassy depth feel, you can add another effect. For instance, we can call this maybe an inner shadow. We can adjust the angle. And so what we'll do here is for X, we'll do -4 here. And now notice how it's affected over here. And maybe we don't want it to be that thick. We could do something like -2 instead. -2. And we'll change the color of the inner shadow to white or so, just to start out with. It does have 25% opacity. We'll take the blur down to maybe just 1. We'll see what that looks like. And that looks okay. It might be coming across a little bit too strong. You don't want anything to stand out too much. We could take the blur down to 0 if you wish, and then maybe change this to -1 if we want it to be very thin, subtle sort of effect. You could also add another inner shadow and maybe make it darker on the other portion. But that's essentially how you achieve this effect. It's very cool. And one thing to note with glassmorphism or neumorphism, which we're going to cover in a second, you don't want to overuse them. For instance, if I duplicated this maybe 3 times, maybe we'll move things up just a bit. I would say that might be a little bit too much. Instead, what we could do is we can get rid of this effect here and get rid of the inner shadow and maybe leave it like that. And that way these ones are a little bit less competing with the this effect up here. I see a lot of new designers try to apply this effect and neumorphism on almost every element, and it kills the aesthetic because it's just too much. Another option outside of just having the 10% white opacity, you could do a stroke instead. So it's all about finding ways to complement different aesthetics here. So we can then take the opacity down, maybe. That's suitable as well. Then we could take this and duplicate it. It's a little bit harder to grab. Actually, I'll just take this and delete it. Hold Alt and Shift to move down. And that's completely fine as well. But that up here is essentially how you create the effect. Now, we can also replicate this real quick, and we could choose a different photo for the background. So if we come over here, we'll go ahead and right click and choose Unsplash once again, and have fun just trying to find a different type of photo. We could try this one. Notice that arc in the background. We can adjust this. Notice this has a crop right here. So look how cool that is. Now, of course, you would want to make your text dark because everything is pretty light right now. So if we changed this, well, instead of doing that, what we could do, right now we're running into a contrast issue. Let's take these and just make them white. This is way too not enough contrast essentially with the type. So again, if you run into this issue, you want to make sure you add a fill here. So we'll delete this one, add one at the top, and notice it's already black, and we can just drag up here to create more contrast so that our typographic elements in the front stick out more. And so that's how you create the glassmorphism effect. So let's also talk about what is called neumorphism. Now, you may have seen this. This one kind of was a little bit made popular earlier on, before glassmorphism. And we could see it's characterized. Let's go ahead and change the background canvas color here to dark so we could see the outline. You can see what it essentially is. Everything looks soft, right? Very subtle, large blurs, drop shadows where you have a light source on one end, like over here, everything is light. And then on the other end, everything is kind of dark. And so I would say in this context right here, it's overdone. You don't want to place it on every single element, in my opinion. Even though they look good, it's just a little bit too much, and most people just have a difficult time even making it look this good. So use it sparingly. Now let me show you how we'll go ahead and create one ourselves. So I'm going to take just this one over here. We'll replicate that. Let's get rid of this background. Oops. Let's make sure we don't delete the whole frame. And what we'll do is let's real quickly get a background color, something darker. You can do this in dark mode. I'll show you light mode as well, but we'll start with dark. All right, so what I'll do is delete this, delete these. We'll just make this white. Actually, maybe we'll go just a little bit dark to create some visual hierarchy there. And what we'll do is we're going to add this onto an actual container. So let's go ahead and create a rectangle here, kind of like a card. And we'll drag these in. And now what we'll do is, for now, we will just use the same background color, so it's going to be hidden. And then we're going to add an effect over here, and it's a drop shadow. So we can see what the shadow looks like by default, and we want to adjust this. So we're going to come out perhaps to 4 here. And again, we may have to experiment with these values. And maybe we'll change these to 7 here and 7 there, and then adjust the opacity. You don't want it to you don't want it to be too strong. All right, so now we have that one. We're going to add another drop shadow, and this time we're going to make the values negative here. So -7 and -7. Now this time we want to choose white, but of course way too much opacity here. We're going to take this down a lot. And the blur we could turn up as well. And that's essentially how you create a neumorphism container. So then we could take, for instance, this, we'll put it inside of here, right click and bring to front. And that's what that looks like. So you could also do this in like icon format. We could take this very same container here and we can make it perfectly square. So if we look at the width by height, we'll make each of them 43 and make sure our border radius is all the way up so that it creates a perfect circle. And then what we can do is we can get an icon. So I'm just going to paste in an icon from Iconify. And then we can add some type. And I think they look pretty cool as an aesthetic on buttons, for instance. Now for this something this small, I think we have a little bit too much blur. So we can always just take that down just a notch. Or if not that, rather the location. So we could do 4 here perhaps, and -4 here. And now it's not so quite extreme. All right, so I mentioned we would do a light version of this. As you can see, this is a light mode as well. And to do this, let's just go ahead and take our container, make it very light, almost completely white, but you don't want to use white because then you won't have an actual highlight to show. So we may have to adjust the colors here. Let's go ahead and change the colors of this. So we'll take the fill here, make it black. This one will be almost black. There we go. And let's just delete these things and we'll just focus on adding this aesthetic to this button here. And so what we'll do is just grab the same background color. And then this one, we're going to increase the opacity to 100% white. That way we can clearly see it. So very cool. Of course, we'll make this black. And I'll show you some other things that you can do with these. So one thing that we can do is we can create kind of multiple levels of this effect. So here's what I mean by that. We'll duplicate this. We're going to grab the bottom one and we're going to hold Shift and then just increase it slightly. So that creates a real cool aesthetic, very simple to achieve. We could take it a step further just for a different aesthetic here. We can take the one in the middle, get rid of the fill, but we'll add a stroke. And for the stroke, it's going to be a linear gradient. So what we can do is we can kind of reverse the effect. The light source is up here on the outer container, but we can make this one perhaps darker on this side. Let's just see what that looks like. So we will come up. This one will make white, but increase the opacity. And as you can see, just a very subtle effect to create different appearances. I think all of these icons are a little bit too large based on the size of the Save to Favorites button. So we'll scale them down just a bit. And there you go. So that's how you can create a neumorphism effect. And here again, once again, is the glassmorphism effect as well. So final thoughts on that. You don't want to overuse these elements. Use them very sparingly and make sure you execute it well. Make sure your drop shadows Make sure none of your drop shadows are coming through too strong when we're talking about neumorphism. You can really throw off the effect. For instance, if I increase this opacity here, it's going to make it look a little bit too cheap. So you want to keep things very subtle when it comes to using these effects. All right, awesome stuff.